Audit and Finance Committee, Mr. Brett.
Thank you, Treasurer. There are three items that I need to review with Convocation this morning. And why don't we do the quickest one first, which is the check signing authority. That can be found in board books at page 424. What the motion relates to is to approve a revised banking resolution that updates the old title of Director Policy with the new title of Director, Office of CO, and Corporate Secretary, and also to update based on the new positions of certain office holders. The schedule itself can be found at Board Books page 428. That sets out who the authorized people are with respect to check signing authority. And this motion is moved by me and seconded by Teresa Donnelly. I'd be pleased to respond to any questions people have about the amended check signing authority.
Do you have a seconder for this controversial motion?
Well,
Mr.
I
Brett?
asked Ms. Donnelly to second the motion, and she gratefully agreed.
Thank you. Are there any questions in the room or on the telephone over this motion? We're out of lecture mode, Mr. Mayor?
The conference is no longer in lecture mode.
Any questions on the telephone over the check signing motion?
None.
Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Any opposed on the telephone? Thank you, Mr. Brett. The motion's carried.
So the next motion that we
The
have
conference
before
is
you
in lecture mode.
relates to the lawyer's compensation fund balance management policy. The motion can be found at Board Books 417. It asks that Convocation amend the lawyer's compensation fund balance management policy as set out in the attached to reduce the minimum balance from 3 1 in 100 year events to 1 in 200 year event. This, I think, I need to provide a little bit more background than the check signing authority, Treasurer. So, just by way of background, from about 1998 to 2012, the compensation fund balance grew quite significantly from $8 million up to $25 million. And so in 2013, and there was no real fund balance policies. And in 2013, the Audit Finance Committee said, look, we've got this large general fund, we've got a large compensation fund, we're just going to let them keep growing. It had an advantage because they throw off investment income, so it's helping to reduce fees and so forth. But we're not really set up as an investment manager to manage funds to generate income to reduce fees. And so in 2013, what the Audit Finance Committee did is they developed a policy for the general fund, and they also developed a policy for the compensation fund. And with the assistance of an auditor, the fund management policy at that time was to keep the fund balance between a minimum of 3 1 in 100 year events and 4 1 in 100 year events. And what that policy then required, based on what the actuary had said, is that the fund should be between 16.5 and 22 million. And given that the fund at the time was 25.8 million, it was extremely risk adverse. And in fact, what we did over the years is that we would take funds from the compensation fund and use them to reduce fees. So we would take the surpluses out and use them as a way of reducing fees. So things were all hunky-dory up until about 2014. And in 2014, for the first time in many, many years, there were a very significant events. They arose from essentially trust defalcations relating to condominium projects. And it resulted in reserves being set that reduced the fund balances to about 15.6 million, which was slightly below the policy minimum. And so what we were faced with doing is, in order to get up to the policy minimum under the old policy, would have required significant fee increases, and we weren't convinced that it was entirely necessary. So when we considered this at the committee, there were two kind of main factors that drove the policy change. And the first and the most important was the actuary did some revised analysis. And under that revised analysis, if we were going to keep our current minimum, which was 3 1 in 100 year events, we would have had to increase the fund balance up to $29 million. And this would have required a minimum increase in the compensation levy this year of about $145. And quite frankly, the committee felt that this would be excessive given our ability to mitigate risk through a number of other factors. The second issue that required us to change this was, as you'll see in one of the reports coming up, the Compensation Fund Committee was looking at the claim limit. And for many years, the limit on the claim was $150,000. And keep in mind, this is a discretionary fund. It's something that was set up to respond essentially to defalcations and circumstances where insurance and so forth does not respond to the claim. And what the actuary said is that actually the demands on the fund will not increase that much, even if you raise the limit up to about $500,000. And that's because most of the claims are small claims, and there are very few claims that actually rise up above the $150,000 limit. So what the Audit and Finance Committee determined was that the current policy was unduly conservative, that we didn't need to do what we'd been doing in past, which is generating this huge fund which generated investment returns, and that in actual fact we had the ability to significantly mitigate the risks of these kind of extraordinary events. And that the ability to mitigate the risk comes first of all because we have the ability, if bad things happen, to increase the fund, the compensation levy, and to do so gradually in a reasonable manner so that we get the fund back up to an appropriate level. And secondly, in any event, the grants are discretionary, so that in terms of demands on the fund, we have the discretion to grant or to refuse them. And so again, we consulted with the actuaries, and what the actuaries told us is that if we went to a 1 in 200 year event, that would bring the fund minimum fund balance in at about $15 or $16 million was kind of where we were at. And we're recommending that there be a slight increase in the compensation fund levy to make sure that we stay within the policy guidelines. So that's a long-winded way of explaining why we're coming back to you and suggesting that the fund balance, a minimum, be changed to some extent. And Treasurer, I'm available for any questions that Convocation may have.
And again, it's moved by you, seconded by Ms. Donnelly, is that right?
Yes.
Questions for Mr. Brett? Any questions on the
The
telephone?
conference is no longer in lecture mode.
No one wants to know why we have three times we have a 100-year event within 100 years? Thank you. With that, I'll put the matter to a vote. All in favor? Any opposed? Any opposed on the
The
telephone?
conference is in lecture mode. The conference is no longer in lecture mode.
You think we gave them enough time, Mr. Lynn? No, we're no longer. That's right. We're not. Okay, that's fine. Hearing no objection on the telephone, the motion is carried. Thank you.
The conference is in lecture mode.
So the final matter that I want to do is to review with Convocation the 6 month, the financial statements for the 6 months that end on June 2016. And if I could ask you to turn in your board books to page 441. So what you should have there is kind of an overview that shows the schedule of revenues and expenses up to June 31st. And I'm conscious of the fact that I'm going to be giving a budget presentation this afternoon, so I don't want to overstay my welcome here. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, but if people have questions, I'm certainly happy to respond to them. So the bottom line is good news. If you look at the total expense line, or sorry, the line 14, the surplus or deficit, you'll see that we had actually budgeted to this time of the year a deficit of about $1.8 million, and we've achieved a surplus of $4.23 million. So we have a budget variance of about $6.2 million. Some of this is timing issues, but there's no question that we're going to be running a significant surplus by the end of this year, which is good news. Let me explain why it is that we're heading that way. If you look at revenues, essentially we're on budget there. Under PD&C, you can see that our revenues there have gone up. This is largely because we've had more people in the licensing process than expected, and also favorable returns on our continuing professional development programs. Investment income, those of you who invest, we're very conservatively invested, so about 75% fixed income, 25% equity, actually somewhat lower than that. And fixed income's not doing well, and you can see our investment income is down. In terms of the other revenues, they're up slightly. Expenses, professional regulation, tribunals, and compliance. Significant saving there. A lot of that is timing. There's new positions that we budgeted for, but it's taking longer to fill some of those positions, and there's a few other factors that account for that. Under PD&C, not too far off, but a surplus there. Corporate services, quite significant savings there. Under Convocation, policy, and outreach, again, very significant savings there. And part of that is venture expenses. And again, this is one of the areas where staff tell me that ventures are not always very good at getting their expense claims in on time. And it may be that with the passage of time, this surplus will be eroded. And you'll see also that the allocation to the compensation fund is a significant variance there, and again, because of the issues we talked about earlier. So a quick overview, Treasurer, happy to respond to any questions that Convocation may have.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Brett. Any questions? Yes, Mr. Lerner.
Well, Mr. Brett, at least twice a year brings us good news. And I think in the last several years, we've had semi-annual reports of good news. I know that there are increasing demands annually on the budget, where we are called or asked to fund new resources. But I'm just wondering when if we decide that we have enough in reserves that our members ought to be compensated, or at least reimbursed for some of the money that they annually pay in. Given that annually we end up in a surplus position. I know we do our best to uphold fees in line. I know we don't like to go into reserves, but it seems that every year when we hear the report, everything is increasing, yet the fees seem to stay relatively the same.
So thank you very much for that question, Mr. Lerner. It's actually a timely question. Those who will come to the budget presentation will learn, first of all, I'm not always a bearer of good tidings. We will be budgeting a fee increase this year, and I'm sure my friend Mr. Warda will point out to the coincidence that he leaves as co-chair and immediately the fees go up. But you'll also see in the budget that we are intending to draw on the reserves quite significantly to mitigate the fee increase that would otherwise be budgeted. And keep in mind that we do have a policy with respect to the fund balances. So the fund balances, what we're doing is to keep between 2 and 3 months of overall expenditures. So if we're above that, then the policy says that we have to bring the fund balance down to the maximum level within a 3-year period. so that there is a process that we put in place through our fund policies, so that if these funds get quite large, we are required by virtue of the decision made by Convocation to take those excesses and use them to mitigate the fees on a regular basis. So a good question, and the answer is yes, we will be drawing on reserves to reduce the fee increases that would otherwise be necessary this year.
Any other questions in the room?
The conference is no longer in lecture mode.
Any questions on the telephone? Hearing none, thank you very much, Mr. Brett.
Almost within the
The
15 minutes.
conference is in lecture mode.
Just over, but thank you, appreciate it.